COVID-19 is forcing some hospitals worldwide to make an impossible choice. Who lives and who dies? Fortunately, Oregon isn't there, but it's preparing for the day that it may be. So can you pump your own gas here now or not? Well, yes, you can. No, actually. Well, it depends. If only we're as simple as New Jersey. And you kind of feel like everywhere you look, it's all coronavirus all the time. Yeah, us too. Well, now imagine being this couple who spent a month in the Grand Canyon, cut off from the outside world, only to emerge and find the world completely changed. Here's the story.
I don't know if I'm envious of that couple or not. I'm not quite sure. I'm still trying to hash it out. I'm Dan Haggerty. Hi, welcome to the story. The weekend is over. I spent the entire weekend pretty much inside with my kids in full dad mode, though we have certainly reached the point where they're starting to realize that I'm just winging it and have no idea what I'm doing. That said, it looks like more and more of you are doing the exact same thing and staying inside. You got that stay inside message loud and clear. Look at the coast this weekend compared to last. Nice job, everyone, even though it was a little rainier out there this weekend. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And it's going to take a lot of missed weekends, of course, at the coast to beat this thing, but I think we can do it. And we're going to be here for you at the story the entire time. So while you're at home, reach out, say hi, ask questions, leave comments. We read all of them: Facebook, Instagram, email, Skywriter, Singing, Telegram, Morse code, or Twitter using the hashtag #HeyDan. Now, it probably feels like everywhere you look, you see coronavirus this, coronavirus that. I mean, I'm one to talk. We've been covering it nonstop for weeks now. But there is at least one place where news of a global pandemic has not reached, deep down to the very bottom of the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River. And we know that news hasn't reached there because Kyla Boshi met a Portland couple who just finished a 24-day rafting trip and had a lot to catch up on.
Canyon report, day 5.
They went to get away and disconnect. A 24-day adventure rafting down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon.
We're gonna come up on Qui-Gon's Rapid.
With no cell service, no internet, and no news.
Then it was pretty much radio silence.
On March 1st, Gail Murphy and her boyfriend Chris Murray set out on their rafting adventure.
Another night where we slept out under the stars.
The Portland couple would spend nearly 3 weeks paddling in almost complete isolation, unaware that schools had closed and many workers were forced to stay home. It wasn't until their journey ended that a worker from the rafting company delivered the ominous news. The world they were returning to would look vastly different.
And we get off the boats and we start unloading the boats. And she comes and she reads this, and we all just stopped and we're looking at each other.
Gail and Chris were some of the last people in America to learn about the widespread impact of the coronavirus pandemic.
I mean, I think all of us had almost at least 50 text messages.
They came back to a new reality.
I think there's a normal amount of culture shock when you come back from being disconnected. And there's just so much more culture shock right now in coming into a completely different, really a different world.
The Portland couple didn't have much time to get ready for re-entry. They both work in healthcare. Gail, a nurse, Chris, a social worker in a psychiatric emergency department.
Having it kind of sink in that, yes, actually, it is a very big deal. And then, at that point, for me, it's like I need to go back to work in an emergency department in 36 hours.
Unlike most people inundated with 24-hour news updates and warnings from health officials, the Portland couple hasn't had time to process change and sort through confusion.
We will just have moments where we look at each other and this is crazy.
They've been thrust into this new reality after 24 days of isolation on the Colorado River. Kyla Boshi, KGW News.
I know that everything going on in Oregon has felt like a major disaster for a while now, but as far as the federal government is concerned, it officially became one over the weekend. So it's officially a major disaster in Oregon. We're also under a state of emergency. 2, if you live in Portland. So what do all these official declarations actually do for us? And how did we get here? Let's go back to March 8th, officially 3 weeks ago, but feels more like an eternity at this point. That's when Governor Brown first declared a state of emergency in Oregon. We had 14 COVID-19 cases at the time.
This emergency declaration gives the Oregon Health Authority and the Office of Emergency Management all the resources at our state's disposal to stem the spread of this disease.
And it's scheduled to expire in May. We'll see how that goes when we get there. But 4 days and 7 cases later, on March 12th, Mayor Wheeler declared a state of emergency in Portland.
That allowed the city to do things like set curfews and limit gatherings. It was originally supposed to end on March 26th, but the mayor extended it by 2 weeks to April 9th. Last Wednesday, March 25th, leaders asked the White House to issue a major disaster declaration for Oregon. By then, the government had already issued one in 4 states, including Washington. Finally, yesterday morning, March 29th, the White House announced it declared one in Oregon, too. This frees up emergency aid money for the state to use to help local businesses and agencies hit hard by the pandemic. It also reimburses the state and local governments for the action it takes to fight back. According to FEMA's website, 21 states plus Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and Guam have been declared major disasters by the feds. And that's how we got here.
All right, our big story tonight centers on a big question. It's frankly chilling, if you ask me, and being asked quietly across the country right now. If and when a surge of COVID-19 patients overwhelms our healthcare system, how do doctors decide who gets care and who doesn't? And we started thinking about this last week when we saw this letter leaked from Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. It was addressed to patients and their families, and it explains a policy that the hospital could use when deciding which patients to try and save and which ones will receive comfort care before they die. Basically, save the ventilators and other scarce but life-saving equipment for people who have the best chance of surviving. The hospital confirmed that the letter is in fact real, but it has not been sent out yet because that policy is not yet in place. Specifically, it said some patients will be extremely sick and very unlikely to survive their illness, even with critical treatment. Treating these patients would take away resources for patients who might survive. Now, before we dive into these policies being enacted here, and they are being enacted here, let's be clear, Oregon is not there yet either, okay? Our health officials have said that Oregonians are actually doing a pretty good job right now of flattening the curve and preventing our hospitals from being overrun with cases. But we have seen these tragic decisions play out in reality in Italy. A doctor near Milan described to the New York Times the choices that they have had to make there because of a rush of sick people. He said, if you are 85, I give the bed to another who is 45, but it's difficult to tell people that if you are 80, you will never have an ICU bed. Now, if we learn from Italy and continue social distancing, our hospitals won't need to make these life and death decisions. But Maggie Vespa reports they're prepared to.
For weeks now, Oregon's healthcare system, like those across the country, has been walking a fine line between maintaining the public's confidence in its ability to handle this crisis and sounding alarms about hospitals not having enough critical medical equipment. In particular, enough ventilators, machines that keep people with severe respiratory problems breathing. That said, last week, the state released new encouraging projections. Specifically, officials said if we continue our current strategy of social isolation, the virus could infect as few as 1,000 Oregonians. That's opposed to 6,000 with less extreme measures and 26,000 if we were to do nothing and go about our lives as usual. So if infections are kept down to that 1,000 number, that first projection, state officials say hospitals around here shouldn't be overwhelmed, and then staff wouldn't have to make these literal life or death decisions. That said, we've learned they're prepared to. They have been for years. This is the Oregon Crisis Care Guidance. Last updated in June of 2018, it lists pretty much every state health agency and major hospital in Oregon as co-sponsors, including OHSU, Legacy Health, and Providence. In short, it's the official guideline for how Oregon's hospitals should handle 2 main types of public health crises: severe outbreaks of infectious disease, such as an influenza pandemic, and mass trauma events, such as a major earthquake. And specifically, the 60-plus page guidance walks through how hospitals overwhelmed with too many patients and not enough resources should choose who gets life-saving treatment and who does not, calling for a just plan with evidence-based objective measures to predict likelihood of survival. It reads, quote, as a general principle, in order to save the greatest number of lives, life-saving interventions should be provided first to those most likely to benefit. It goes on to say that in a crisis, some people may not be able to get life-saving treatment even though they need it. It instructs doctors that if, due to a health condition, someone's life expectancy is less than 6 to 12 months, they may not be able to receive critical care. That includes people with things like advanced cancer, heart failure, or liver disease. Toward the end of the document, in the frequently asked questions section, it states age, non-life-threatening disability, and social worth are not reasons why someone shouldn't get care. We reached out to every major metro area hospital about this guidance. None wanted to do an interview. Of the few who responded, a communications rep with Kaiser Permanente simply wrote, "We have not established directives of this type. We have purchased more ventilators." When I asked how many, he said 350. Another rep from Providence Health reached back out and said he didn't want to talk about the guidance yet because staff had been told the state was working to update it with information specific to COVID-19. Some outside the medical community hope that happens soon.
We really need leadership to make clear that people with disabilities have equal value to other Oregonians.
I talked with Jake Cornett, the executive director of Disability Rights Oregon, about a letter he sent to Governor Kate Brown's office last week. It describes how even before the COVID-19 pandemic, people with disabilities, especially those who are older, quote, have often fought ingrained attitudes about the inherent value of our lives to receive health care. The letter acknowledges state law flat out bans that discrimination, but it says this virus is unlike anything we have ever seen before. And it makes a plea for the governor and the Oregon Health Authority to circle back with hospitals and make sure staff are clear on Oregon's stance.
Before the full force of this health crisis hits Oregon's hospitals, we would encourage them to make more clear, more definitive statements and to remind hospitals and healthcare providers of this requirement under the law.
Okay, let's talk to Maggie for just a minute. Maggie, I want to start with the last point that we heard there. We hear there's an update coming. How much do we know about that right now?
So we just found out some information on that today. I talked on the phone to Dr. Richard Lehman. He's with the Oregon Health Authority, and he said basically officials aren't quite working so much to update this guide as they are to kind of curate all the information in it down to specifically what hospitals need. In other words, the stuff that's most tied to COVID-19 and this pandemic. So he said the first kind of round of info they're highlighting is how to keep infection rates low, how to keep this virus from spreading. And then he said the second round is kind of how to help hospitals use whatever equipment they have more efficiently. Here's what he said about that.
We've actually got some COVID-specific strategies that show how to provide the most effective care possible with the resources available so we can take care of a lot more people, even if they're pretty sick.
Yeah, and so after that, Dr. Lehman did clarify that another round of information, kind of the worst case scenario stuff, is what we talked about in the piece. And he said doctors, nurses, and ethics experts right now are also, yes, making sure that hospitals are clear on the guidelines as far as how to ration critical care if and when they have more patients than they do equipment or manpower. He said they want to make sure that's done in a just way. But again, Oregon's not there. Everybody hopes that we don't get there. The projections look good, saying that we won't. They just want to make sure it's ready. And he said it should be ready, he hopes, within days, is how we put it.
Maggie, talk to us a second about the fears we're hearing from those advocates that they were raising about people with disabilities. That's not just happening here. That's not unique to us.
100%. Yeah, that's a national movement. Advocates raising those concerns across the country. In fact, I want to show you a New York Times article that talks about the state of Washington and basically the Washington counterpart of the group that you heard from. You heard from a representative of Disability Rights Oregon. Well, Disability Rights Washington has filed a federal civil rights complaint saying the state's guidance in Washington, remember, includes a line, they say, about considering patients' baseline functional status. And they say there are other lines that kind of leave people with non-life-threatening disabilities and older people a bit more vulnerable if and when it comes down to this issue of rationing care. So again, it's a nationwide issue. And for that reason, advocates across the country are pushing for a federal guideline or federal guidelines to be handed down on this. In the meantime, states are doing their own work, just like we're seeing in Oregon. Dan.
Maggie Vespa with the latest. Thanks, Maggie. Hey, Oregon, so did you hear over the weekend? You need to start pumping your own gas now. Well, I mean, that's not quite true. I mean, it is, just not always. Man, I wish our leaders could be as clear as New Jersey's. And Tillamook County finally has its internet service again. It only took like a month, and it cost the county a whole lot of money. And for as many coronavirus questions as we get just as many random ones. So we're going to give some random questions some thoughtful answers when the story continues.
Okay, let's answer some viewer questions, and this is a great one. This person wants to know, if Oregon has only about 400 cases, why is there such a shortage of PPE? That's from Jeff Peterson. Jeff, thank you again for that great question. So healthcare personnel use PPE every day as part of their jobs. Not all patient encounters require the use of masks or other protective gear in normal circumstances, but these are not normal circumstances. So even routine patient encounters are fraught with the risk of transmission of the virus, and doctors and nurses, they all need to use PPE for all patient contacts. Plus, there are supply chain issues. So as soon as people started getting scared, they started panic buying. So all of that material disappeared from store shelves. They're restocked from the same manufacturers who supply the hospitals. States are also in bidding wars to get that PPE and all of those masks. Thank you again for sending in your questions. Keep using that hashtag, HeyDan. Here's another question we saw on social media. This person wants to know, hey Dan, is the virus still contagious after someone dies? So according to the doctors we've been consulting with, the short answer is yes. Viral particles on the person's skin and body fluids can be present for hours after death, and those who do post-mortem care are advised to take extra precautions. Please keep sending in those questions using the hashtag HeyDan.
Kristen, thank you. Another question that a lot of you have been asking over the weekend had to do with pumping gas, because the new rules from the Oregon Fire Marshal were a little bit confusing. Teresa Michaels said, hey Dan, why is Oregon switching to everyone pumping their own gas? Does it really make sense to have hundreds of people touching the pump handle? Thanks for that question. I do want to correct a little bit of it, though, right off the bat here. We are not all pumping our own gas now. That's not quite what Oregon did. See, the fire marshal changed the rules to basically leave it up to the individual stations. So they're going to decide whether or not they want to have an attendant out there. They just want to straddle that fine line between keeping gas available to all of us while also keeping face-to-face contact between employees and drivers at a minimum. As for the second part of your question, doesn't this mean that we're going to have to touch the pump handle now, that more people will have to touch the pump handle? And if gas stations don't have those attendants, well, yeah, the answer is yes, we will. Wear a glove or something. I think we can get by. The stations are required to sanitize the pump handles, but you'll still need to touch them if you want to pump your own gas. This rule will be in place until April 11th. That's in about 2 weeks. Hopefully that all made sense. If not, use the hashtag HeyDan to ask us to clarify. And look, not every leader can be like Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, who also does not pump their own gas. Rules are a bit different there. Governor Murphy said, we have no plans to turn our gas stations into self-serve at this time. Please do not pump your own gas. Oregon leaders, take notes. Now, most of your questions are coronavirus related, but not all of them. Some of them are just random. So here's a segment we're calling Random Questions, Thoughtful Answers. David asked me on Twitter, hey Dan, is Portland still getting our baseball stadium and team? What's the status on that? Now, we haven't really heard much from the Portland Diamond Project lately, especially because all sports are kind of on hold right now, but we did check in with them to see what's going on, and they tell us they're still working right now to secure that property at Terminal 2 to build a stadium. And I know that's been the deal kind of for a while now, but having a secure stadium plan is essential to competing for a team against other cities that also want baseball. There's also a plan to install the old Jansen Beach Carousel next to the future ballpark. And the Diamond Project said that they're going to let us know right away when they have a new update, so we'll let you know too. All right, next question. This one's from Missy on Twitter. She said, hey Dan, can you do a follow-up on the chef Dan Brophy murder? Now, in case you have forgotten, Daniel Brophy was an instructor at the Oregon Culinary Institute, where he was found dead in 2018. His wife Nancy shared the news about his death on Facebook. She spoke at his memorial, and then a few months later, she was arrested for his murder. Oh, and it also turns out she wrote an essay called How to Murder Your Husband in 2011. All right, let's fast forward until now. Nancy Crampton Brophy is still awaiting trial, which is scheduled to happen in September. But last week, her lawyers, they filed a motion asking for her to be moved from jail to home detention because of the coronavirus outbreak. They're arguing that she's in the high-risk group because of her age and medical history. Now, there hasn't been a decision on that yet, but there is a hearing. It's scheduled for next month, so we'll keep you posted. All right, Kim tweeted to me and said, hey, Dan, what is going on with that city on the coast that had their computers and computer system hijacked? I think it was Tillamook, but not sure. It was actually Tillamook County. They had this massive cyber attack in January, took down the government's phones and email and internet, credit card services, everything. For an update on it, let's turn to old-timey news anchor Dan Haggerty.
Good evening and welcome to The Story with old-timey news anchor Dan Haggerty. with continuing coverage of the ransomware attack that blasted Tillamook County back to the olden days by rendering their computer systems inoperable. The county paid the sum of $300,000 in ransom to regain access to its computers and accounts, according to a recent edition of the Daily Astorian. Authorities believe an international organization of cybercriminals was behind the assault, and that it could have taken years to undo the damage if the ransom was not paid. For The Story, this is old-timey news anchor Dan Haggerty.
All right, we're going to take another little break from all the coronavirus coverage and bring you some headlines that you might have missed otherwise in a segment we call In Other News. In other news, Portland's candidates for mayor are facing off right now in the biggest debate in the mayoral race. Mayor Ted Wheeler is debating against three challengers for his seat: Sarah Iannarone, Ozzie Gonzalez, and Teresa Rayford. The City Club is hosting it virtually without an audience. You can watch it at kgw.com. Police in Oregon City arrested a man who broke into a home overnight while the people inside were sleeping. Police say Monil Dennis used a garage door opener from an unlocked car to get inside the home near Johnson and Hood Streets. They say he took some electronics. Police caught up with him about an hour later and arrested him after a short chase. The Seaside Aquarium is taking care of a rare eel that washed up on the coast. A man who was walking near Sunset Beach this weekend saw the Pacific snake eel wiggling in the sand. He called the aquarium because it was too lethargic to go back into the ocean. Pacific snake eels are typically found between California and Peru and rarely seen this far north. This is actually the third time this species has been reported on an Oregon beach. And that's in other news. All right, got a couple more minutes left. We're going to finish up the story next with some of your comments. I'll see you in 2 minutes.
Time to answer another viewer question. So Frank Adrian wants to know, hey Dan, how come the local hospitals are not releasing the number of coronavirus patients they're treating? Releasing the numbers doesn't divulge any patient information. The public has a right to information during the crisis. Yes, you're exactly right, and you know it. Just yesterday, OHSU did release their statistics. 18 cases to date with 10 admitted, 8 treated as outpatients. 15 of the 18 were tested at OHSU. 3 were tested elsewhere and transferred, and of the 10 admitted, 3 have been discharged, 1 has died, and as of yesterday, 6 were still in the hospital. The Oregon Health Authority also releases data constantly on cases, and you can find that information on our website. Please keep using the hashtag HeyDan. We do our very best to answer all of your questions.
All right, let's talk about questions and comments. David writing in saying, hey, Dan, why is the U.S. #1 in cases of COVID-19 ahead of China? Yeah, we're ahead of China. We're ahead of South Korea. We're ahead of Italy at this point. I don't know the exact answer to that. A few factors. Probably most of the confirmed cases in China were in Wuhan, which is, of course, a city of 10 million or so people, but they were able to shut that city down and did so very quickly. Also, they were able to use some tactics that practically would not really work here in the United States to make sure that people were doing the things they wanted them to do over in China. But there are a bunch of factors, so maybe it's something we should research and look up a little bit more. Lisa writing in and saying, I emailed a question about utilities usage. You know, with everybody staying home and kids out of school, are utility bills, electric, water, that sort of thing, skyrocketing because so many people are in their homes all day? And how can people who are on fixed incomes or, you know, need a little bit of extra money or out of their work right now, how are they affording that? That's something we should definitely check out. Another guy was asking me, wouldn't we be able to see if people are washing their hands to take a look at the water bill? That's a great question. Another random question that needs a thoughtful answer. Somebody asking what happened to the Portland Meadows racing horse sign. We're going to look at that too. We're going to look at everything. Keep the questions coming. I wish I could read all of them. There were a ton that came in tonight. We'll read them tonight into tomorrow and start answering them for you. That's it for this evening and the story. We'll see you tomorrow.